Any ideas?
Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Matter School of Economics, I welcome you all on the occasion of the release of the book Forks in the Road, My Days at RBI and Beyond by our respected chairman, Dr. C. Rangarajan, which is published by Penguin Random House. We will start today's proceedings with a prayer. I request you all to switch your mobile off or keep it in silent mode, and please rise for the prayer.
நீராறும் கடலுடுத்த நிலமடந்தை கெடிலொழுகும் சீராறும் மதனமென திகழ்வரத கண்டனிதில் திக்கணமும் அதில் சிறந்த திராவிடனல் திருநாடும் தக்க சிறு பிறை முதலும் தரித்தனரும் திலகமுமே அத்திலக வாசனை போல் அனைத்துலகும் இன்பமுற எத்திசையும் புகழ் மணக்க இருந்த பெரும் தமிழனங்கே தமிழனங்கே உன் சீரிழவை திறந்தியந்து செயல் மறந்து வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே.
Thank you. Please be seated. Dr. C. Rangarajan needs no introduction, but it is always a pleasure to talk about his illustrious career. Padma Vibhushan Dr. Chakraborty Rangarajan is among the foremost economists of the country, who has had a profound, lasting and decisive impact in charting the economic direction of the country over the last quarter century. As Governor of Reserve Bank of India during 1992 to 1997, he was part of the core team of economic administrators involved in the strategy, design and implementation of India's path-breaking economic reforms in the 1990s under the able leadership of the then Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. His tenure as an RBI governor was not always smooth sailing, as he had to sail through times of difficulty and crisis. However, in his own words, and I quote, "I was happy to have been part of the team that ushered in the reforms." I continue to quote, "I have written this book to share with you my thinking and my actions on the various issues that came up for consideration before me between 1982 and 2014. Now we will play a video message sent by the commissioning editor of Penguin Random House, Sri Manish Kumar, which will be an introduction to the book.
Respected Sri P. Chidambaram ji, respected Sri N. Vakul ji, respected Srimati Usha Thorat ji, respected Sri K. R. Shanmugam ji, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Madras School of Economics and Penguin Random House India welcome you all to this event to release Forks in the Road, My Days at RBI and Beyond by eminent scholar, economist, policymaker and Padma Vibhushan awardee Dr. C. Rangarajan. Penguin Random House India is indeed delighted and honored to publish Dr. C. Rangarajan, one of the foremost economic thinkers of our time. I personally feel privileged to have got this opportunity to be his editor on this book. My each interaction with Dr. Rangarajan left me enriched. I can only say that a man with sheer brilliance and full of humility, Dr. C. Rangarajan is a role model for all of us. Thank you all for gracing this occasion with your presence this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will felicitate all our dignitaries with a bouquet to each. I will call upon our students, starting with Ms. Navisha Goel, who will present the bouquet to Sri P. Chidambaram. Next will come Ms. Manshish Sharma, who will present the bouquet to Mr. N. Vagu, former chairman, ICICI Bank Limited. Ms. Muskan will present the bouquet to Ms. Usha Thorat, Deputy Governor RBI, former Deputy Governor. Now Ms. Yugantika Gupta will present the bouquet to our chairman, Dr. C. Rangarajan. Now Mr. Majid Bhatt will present the bouquet to our director, Dr. K.R. Shanmugam. Thank you, students. Let me now take the opportunity to introduce Mr. P. Chidambaram, who has graced today's occasion and will be releasing the book written by Dr. C. Rangarajan. P. Chidambaram is currently the member of the Parliament Rajya Sabha. He was the Finance Minister of India for the period of 2004 to 2014, except for a 3.5-year stint as Home Minister. Dr. C. Rangarajan had an overlap with him as the chairman of prestigious Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister from 2005 to 2014. Together, they gave shape to the economic reforms under the Prime Ministership of Dr. Manmohan Singh. Now I invite Mr. P. Chidambaram to release the book.
Sir. Open பண்ணுங்க.
Sir. Now I request Mr. P. Chidambaram to say a few words about the book and also about Dr. C. Rangarajan. Thank you.
Good evening to all of you. Dr. Rangarajan, Shri Vagul, Ms. Usha Thorut, Dr. K.R. Shanmugam, other distinguished members of the Madras School of Economics, faculty, students, admirers of Governor Rangarajan and friends. I'm delighted to be here this evening to be part of the release of the book in Chennai. My only complaint is, since Dr. Rangarajan belongs to Chennai, the book should have been released in Chennai first. It is. I thought it's available on the book stands. That's very comforting, but because I saw the books on the bookshelves and the newsstands. I first met Dr. Rangarajan when he was Deputy Governor and I was Commerce Minister. I used to find a way to the Finance Minister's chamber, and I remember many occasions when then Governor Venkatramanan and Deputy Governor would walk into the Finance Minister's room, not very cheerful, not very happy, and then Dr. Rangarajan will pull out a slip of paper like this from his pocket and hand it over to Governor Venkatramanan. And he will tell the Finance Minister, today's reserves are $400 billion, or it's come down to $350 million. Those are very difficult times. And in those difficult times, I have no hesitation in saying, the two pillars that held up what remained of economic stability and financial stability in India. On the government side, it was Dr. Manmohan Singh, and on the Reserve Bank side, it was Dr. Rangarajan. I don't know why the introducer corrected herself when she first referred to Usha Thorut as Deputy Governor, then former Deputy Governor. According to me, once a governor, always a governor of the RBI. And I always address Dr. Rangarajan, Dr. Y.V. Reddy as governor. I think once a governor, you're always a governor. Unlike the 28 other governors of this country, these governors try to hold up and fight for financial stability. Many of the young students here may have been born after 1991. In fact, when I tell my granddaughter that in the 2 years I was in the US, I didn't speak to my parents even once, it's difficult for her to believe that, because she speaks to her mother practically every other day. So, to the young students here, I want to say that you don't quite know what India was before 1990. And you will perhaps never know from personal experience. So I would commend to you, read this book. It will tell you what dire straits Indian economy was and how we managed to navigate through the first 10 or 15 years to where we are today. I'm not saying we are a rich country. I'm not saying our people are rich. I'm not saying that inequality has vanished. I'm not saying everybody has the basic minimum needs of life, but we are several times stronger as an economy today than what we were in 1991. there were not only forks in the road, there were obstacles in the road. There were hurdles in the road. And many of those hurdles was inside the government. In fact, when Dr. Rangarajan had to hop, skip and jump, you all know that famous phrase, when he did the two devaluations on July 1, 1991 and July 3, 1991. There was an obstacle erected on July 2. Some people in government would have loved that we did not take the next step. But I think Dr. Manmohan Singh, with his usual reticence, only asked on the phone, what's the situation? And Dr. Rangarajan, with remarkable adroitness and cleverness, said, I have jumped. So the crisis was overcome and we could report to the Prime Minister the second devaluation has been done. Now whether it was actually done when he spoke at 9:30 or not is a secret that will remain. He doesn't reveal that secret even in the book. I think that is a secret that he will keep to himself forever. This book is not light reading. This book is not a book which tells tales. If you're looking for titillation in this book, I'm afraid you will not get. This is a serious study of India's economy, how we have navigated over the last 30 years. In all these 30 years, Dr. Rangarajan has been a firm star on the economic firmament. Whether he was deputy governor or chairman of the Economic Advisory Council, or in the Planning Commission, or chairing number of committees that I'm sure that he has lost count of the committees he has chaired. I can't recall all the committees that he chaired. There was always one name that figured prominently in all the economic decisions that were taken in the last 30 years, and that was Governor Rangarajan. I worked with him closely when he was deputy governor, and then even more closely when he was governor. And I'm grateful that he acknowledges it. We spoke to each other every day. He says so in his book, so it's not a boast which I'm making. We spoke to each other every day. And let me candidly say, I was a student, he was a teacher. I had the same relationship with Dr. Y.V. Reddy. I had the same relationship with Governor Rangarajan. There was no day in which, when I was finance minister, that I did not pick up the phone and speak to the governor of the Reserve Bank. That's how I think it should be. Because both have very important roles. One is mandated by the 1934 law to maintain price stability and stability of the monetary system. The other is politically responsible and accountable for accelerating growth. Sometimes these objectives do come into conflict, and these conflicts can only be resolved if the finance minister stroke prime minister and the governor are in constant touch with each other. They can't look upon themselves as rivals. The kabaddi is now a famous, or becoming a famous sport. You try to encroach on someone's territory and the other team tries to pin you down. And this gentleman will try to extricate himself and go back to his territory. It's not a kabaddi match between the Reserve Bank of India and the government of India. This book has a wide canvas. It talks about monetary policy, the autonomy of the RBI, how RBI gained its autonomy, and whenever it was under threat, regained its autonomy. Talks about fiscal federalism. It talks about some historic steps that were taken. According to me, and I think Dr. Rangarajan will agree, the most historic step that was taken was the abolition of the automatic monetization of the fiscal deficit. That was signed on in March 1997, and it came into effect on 1st of April 1997. It was my privilege to be the finance minister at that time. And the entire document has been reproduced, signed by Dr. Rangarajan and Dr. Reddy on behalf of the RBI, and Montek Singh Ahluwalia and JP Mathur on behalf of the government. I think that won for the RBI a great degree of autonomy. Imagine if automatic monetization of deficit had continued, even in a weak form. It would have crippled the RBI, and it would have emboldened the government to be adventurous. This book also talks about many other steps. The dual exchange rate, the movement towards the market-determined exchange rate, the FRB and the Monetary Policy Committee. Each step was crucial in our journey towards becoming a more stable economy. And who better to describe these steps than Governor Rangarajan, who was right there, witnessing, authoring, guiding, mentoring, and putting his imprint on each one of these historic decisions. Dr. Rangarajan talks with some disappointment about how government curtailed the tenures of some governors. I think it started with Mr. Malhotra, then Sri Venkatramanan's tenure was curtailed. Dr. Raghuram Rajan's tenure was, according to me, cruelly curtailed. And Dr. Urjit Patel decided to curtail his own tenure. Now that's those are bad examples. I'm very proud that the governments that I belong to gave a full tenure to every governor that we had appointed. Dr. Rangarajan, Dr. Reddy, Dr. Subbarao, Dr. Jalan, everyone got a full tenure. In fact, Dr. Jalan got an extended tenure. I think it's very important that governors enjoy a full tenure, not to appoint them on probation for 2 or 3 years and then extend their probation for 5 years. I think that's very demeaning to the office of Governor of the RBI. They should be given a full tenure so that they can ensure the autonomy of the RBI and to advance the goals of both the RBI and the government. Dr. Rangarajan's imprint can also be seen in many other areas. The most important was the measurement of poverty. It's still a very controversial subject. There are people who say that poverty has been reduced to a single digit in India. I think such people have not traveled beyond Delhi. It's only when you go into rural India, go to villages, not villages which are abutting a highway, but villages that are remote, which are cut off from the hustle and bustle of trade and goods and services. You will find that there is still deep-seated poverty in many parts of India. I have witnessed this poverty, and that is why I'm very, very skeptical and sometimes angry when I see these very optimistic estimates that poverty has been reduced to a single digit. I think the bottom 20% of India is still very poor and very unequal, and they are left with very little hope. There were various measurements of poverty, starting with Dr. Tendulkar's measurement of poverty and then Dr. Rangarajan's measurement of poverty. I think these poverty estimates are in fact optimistic estimates. With great respect to all the distinguished authors of these estimates, they are very optimistic estimates. But I think poverty is even more deeper entrenched and deeper seated. And the goal of any government must be to ensure that nobody is so poor. If 1,461 million people of China can claim, and I think that claim is largely correct, that they have reduced abject poverty to about 1 or 2%. There's no reason why 1,421 million people in India should be able to one day claim that we have reduced or abolished abject poverty. I think the stability of the monetary system, price stability, plays an important part in the reduction of poverty. As Dr. Rangarajan himself mentions in many places in the book, inflation hurts the poor more than the rich. The rich have the capacity to absorb inflation. The poor do not have the capacity. And what do? In times of distress, in times of loss of jobs, in times of loss of incomes, the first thing they cut out is food or education. We saw that in the pandemic period. We see that when natural disasters strike parts of India. The first thing they cut out is food and education. And of course, goes without saying, they also neglect health care. Now, food, education, and health care are compromised because of deep-seated poverty. It's absolutely important that we quicken the path towards abolition of abject poverty. This is also, if I may say, a concise history of the RBI over the last 30 years. The history of the RBI, many volume series, is a very interesting set of documents. I read chapters in the last week for some other purpose. But this book saves you a lot of trouble of Googling for data. All the data is here. All the data that you want over the last 30 years is here. And even if I sound like blowing our own trumpet, I'm glad that Dr. Rangarajan has recorded that between 2004-05 and 13-14, the growth rates were far higher than the period since 2014-15. The data speaks for itself. Dr. Rangarajan has reproduced the data, and I am therefore entitled to blow our trumpet that during those 10 years, the growth rate was much higher. There's no reason why we should not aspire to and achieve that growth rate. What it needs is sound policies, the monetary authority and the government in sync, dovetailing their policies and making sure that we achieve high growth rates. Without high growth rates, there's no way in which we can abolish poverty. The last thing that I want to say is Dr. Rangarajan has sounded a caution. I don't know if anybody is doing research. He suspects that the ICOR is at a higher level today. He does not delve into that great detail. He thinks that the ICOR is higher. The ICOR was about 4. And when it was 4, with a investment of about 32% to 35%, we could achieve 8% growth. While investment ratio has fallen, it's perhaps because the ICOR has gone up that we are recording low growth rates. So for higher growth, we must not only accelerate investment, aim for higher investment, we must also become more productive and more efficient. The ICOR must be brought down to 4 or below 4. Otherwise, we cannot achieve these high growth rates. In praise of Dr. Manmohan Singh, I want to say one thing, and I will close with that. There are distinguished speakers here. Dr. Manmohan Singh was a great economist in his own right. But he always had at least half a dozen first-rate economists in the system in Delhi. He had one as governor, RBI. He had somebody, more than one in the Planning Commission. He had more than one in the Economic Advisory Council. He had some as advisor to the Prime Minister. He had at least one as advisor to the Finance Minister. And he had at least one as advisor to the Industry Minister. Therefore, at any given time, we had a constellation of star economists in Delhi. And Dr. Rangarajan is not revealing a secret when he says he met the Prime Minister frequently. And I know that others have told me that they met the Prime Minister equally frequently. I can count periods when we had Dr. Reddy, Dr. Rangarajan, Dr. Rajan, Dr. Govind Rao, and very many others, Dr. Rakesh Mohan. We had many others in Delhi, and one could pick up the phone and speak to them. Today, I think the problem is, for many reasons, one of the most important reasons is there are not enough distinguished economists who have access to the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. Free access to the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. Nor do the leaders of the present government seem to seek the views of such distinguished economists. There's no question that the names I mentioned were distinguished economists in their own right. And the foremost monetary economist in India was and is Dr. Rangarajan, without question. And it's the free access of such minds to the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, and the free access of the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister to be able to call upon them and seek their advice, that will keep our economy ticking. I'm very happy that Dr. Rangarajan, at the ripe age of 90, that is a secret that he reveals himself, is able to write today 346-page book. But there are many other books which are clearly in him which are not here. I hope that he will have the good health and the spirit to write the other books, especially of his early childhood and schooling and college. People from humble backgrounds can rise to great heights in India. That is what makes India a great country. But he is not yet written about his humble background and his education in school and college. But that will make a very interesting reading. I wish him the very best. I would urge all serious students of economics and certainly all teachers of economics to read this book to understand the path we have navigated over the last 30 years. I have great pleasure in releasing this book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Our next speaker is Padma Bhushan Sri Narayanan Bagul, who is the former chairman of ICICI Bank Limited, which is the second largest commercial bank in the country. He is widely recognized in India for his role in pioneering the concept of universal banking model that laid the foundation for a new era in Indian banking.
Honorable Finance Minister Chidambaram, I'm repeating what you said, but once a finance minister, always a finance minister. And one of my first lessons I learned when I joined the college was about the book check, once a bearer, always a bearer. You cannot change it. Like there, once a finance minister, always a finance minister. And there is under Governor Dr. Rangarajan, Usha, who has been a very close colleague of mine for quite some years now, 30 years, 40 years. There is one flaw in the, I find that there is one flaw in the agenda. Usually the Chidambaram should be the last speaker. And it's very difficult to follow after him and talk about anything, because it's usually in the structure of the whole thing, people will say that Usha should speak and I should speak and Chidambaram should be the final speaker. Because after he has said the final word, it should be the final word. And we don't think in terms of saying anything else. And it will be embarrassing to say anything else also. And I was very keen that I should come to this function. I was not well for quite some time, and I was only hoping that I would be well enough to come and participate. I owe a long debt of gratitude to Dr. Rangarajan. You do not know how long I know him. You may think that my association with him is as a banker or a governor. I knew him for 70 years. And 7 decades back in 1953, when I entered the undergraduate class in the Commerce Honours, he had just moved out. He was 3 years my senior in Iloilo College. And he had become a teacher. And he was teaching economics at the time. Of course, rural economics. Commerce at the time, we did not have a regular economics class. From that time, I knew him. And he was such a close family friend. And he had showered his love and affections on me. And I was close to his family. His daughter, his wife particularly enjoyed having several times enjoyed the hospitality of Dr. Rangarajan at his house. So I was very keen that I should not miss this opportunity. And at this circumstance, I am glad that I could make it. He showered so much affection on me that even when he was occupying high positions as governor or governor of the Reserve Bank of India, governor of the state, Prime Minister's office, whenever he wanted time, he always was ready to oblige me. And I could, yes, it's okay. That means this is the Reserve Bank and government coming together. And it should not be kept apart. And I recall several occasions he used to give me disproportionate time for me to speak to him. I remember the one portion which describes this book, 95-96, when the interest rates went sky high. I remember the overnight rates went up beyond 100%. It was 120% or something like that. And we at the development bank were struggling because we were cut out of the market of the government bonds and we had to borrow in the market. The interest rates went up to 15% borrowing rates. We had to lend at about 18%. I was wondering, where do you get projects going with a lending rate of 18%? With IRR cannot be more than 10%. I sought a meeting with him. I thought there is no solution in you for this type of phenomenon. But I thought that I owed it to my constituents to go and seek a meeting with the Reserve Bank governor to find whether there is some solution to this problem, because the struggle was so much. When I went to his room, I was very surprised. He had already prepared himself what for I came. Mr. Tarapur was also with him. And Tarapur spread a chart and started explaining to him and me what is the rise in M3 and what has been the rise in inflation, how the Reserve Bank of India, we were tackling the whole situation and we have to live with these high interest rates. And he told me something is very interesting. See, we in the Reserve Bank of India have been mandated to control the inflation. And what we are doing is nothing but control the inflation. So, but I told Tarapur, I know, but what about the economic development of this country? At 18% interest rate, where do you get the economic development? And he said, for that you have come to the wrong place. You have to go to the finance minister for the economic development. We are not responsible for the economic development. In fact, Dr. Rangarajan was very kind. He told to me and told, Vagul, I think this will pass. You better stay with us. After all, we had to bear the burden for about a year or two. Thereafter, things improved. We got stabilized. He was a person who, I must say, was inaugurated the ICICI Bank. He came all the way to Chennai. You remember 1993 when he started the bank? He blessed it. Today, where has it gone? It's gone to places, and so wonderful leadership which is having now. I am so grateful for the type of leadership which is there. I won't dwell very much on this. What Chidambaram said is something which is absolutely true. This book is a very authentic book. Apart from the various points which he said, I don't want to repeat. One thing about this book is that a great deal of authenticity. This book has not been written for the purpose of sensationalism, as he said, not for the purpose of catching the press, saying some useful quotes that can appear in the press, even though I did see one article, but it was not of the same dimension as any sensationalism. But people try to find something there, but it is not there. It is an authentic book, it is a fact, and he has kept the judgments to the bare minimum. And it is not a judgment, ad hoc judgment or something which is derived judgment or what he heard. He has written what he has seen, he has written what he has done, and he was able to reproduce with facts and figures what he has been able to accomplish. And that lends a great deal of authenticity to what he has said. And that authenticity is reflected in some opinions which he has given. These opinions are not judgments, these opinions are something derived from the data. I was looking for a couple of things, and with that I will end. I don't want to. After all, after Mr. Chidambaram said all the things that need to be said about the book, it is not for me to say. But I was attracted by two chapters I was very keen to look for, because one is about the autonomy of the Reserve Bank of India. He does comment on it in two phases, one in the monetary policy and the other in the institutions. Because there has been a general concern which is getting expressed in various circles. I'm sure Chairman also had been voicing that there has been a general decline in the democratic institutions in the country, autonomy of the democratic institutions in the country. Whether it is the judiciary, whether it is the investigating agencies, or whether it is any other election commission for that matter. These are all losing its autonomy. And there has been also talk about Reserve Bank of India being also losing an autonomy. So I was very keen to know what his take on the bank autonomy, because I have heard other speakers always lamenting on the erosion in the economy which the government is going through with this Reserve Bank of India. One sentence attracted me very much. I don't remember the sentence. Very pithy sentence. In political democracy, the Reserve Bank of India only can enjoy only that autonomy which the government of India wants. Now, if government of India is not willing to give the autonomy, the Reserve Bank is not the one which can take it away. Ultimately, as Mr. Chairman mentioned, it is the coordination between the government and the Reserve Bank of India which is important, not one controlling the other. I think in one portion of the book he quotes Jawaharlal Nehru lamenting, saying that what has happened? Why can't Reserve Bank of India follow the government's policy? I mean, what is so great about the Reserve Bank of India that they should follow its own policy? I'll just mention one interesting episode about this autonomy. You may enjoy it. This was personally told to me by Mr. Narasimham, who was a very outstanding officer in the Reserve Bank of India, outstanding governor. And he regaled in telling small tales. One such tale was, he was working as a secretary of the Reserve Bank of India. I don't know whether that position still is there. Very important position. H.V.R. Iyengar was the governor of the Reserve Bank of India at the time. A letter was received from Bank of International Settlements in which they asked the degree of autonomy enjoyed by the various banks. And those who know Narasimham know that he is a master of English prose. He can write a very fine letter. He wrote a beautiful letter saying that Reserve Bank of India is totally independent of the government, and government doesn't interfere in these matters. We enjoy a full autonomy. Then he went and presented the draft to H.V.R. Iyengar. H.V.R. Iyengar looked at it and said, "It's wonderful. Narasimham, you write so well, and this is a remarkable piece. I think it's okay." Then as Narasimham was about to cross the door and go out, Iyengar called him. I said, "Narasimham, to be on the safe side, why don't you send the draft to the finance secretary and get his approval?" And that's the degree of autonomy which the Reserve Bank of India enjoyed. From what, 56? This was a period of 1956-57 when H.V.R. Iyengar was there. There's always a tussle between the government and the Reserve Bank of India. It all depends not only what the government gives, what the governor takes also. Sometimes the governor can't really take. I know several instances why Dr. Rangarajan himself and his successors, Dr. Reddy particularly, mention was made. He was very assertive when it comes to a question of, because I was not a central player, I was watching it from the sidelines. I could see how impact this Dr. Rangarajan and his successors made on the government. And the government listened to them with respect, and the way in which the governor takes it. If the governor surrenders it, then there's no way in which the government talk about the autonomy. Another passage which I enjoyed reading, and I'm glad that Chidambaram dwelt a little on it, I don't want to mention about that. This is the reform in 1981. I mean, that everybody, the book completely says this. Dr. Rangarajan was a central player in the whole scene. He witnessed the whole crisis, he witnessed the resolution of the crisis, he witnessed the transformation of the economy. All these things so beautifully described in the book. We were, of course, silent witnesses. We were in the sidelines. We were not the central player. But I do belong to a small club at that time. We were favored what we call the Reform Club. I don't know why we styled ourselves. It's a self-styled Reform Club. We were in so far looking for major reforms to take place. We knew that in 1991, when the crisis hit, that reforms are inevitable. We were aware of the discussions going on at the IMF. Then the issue came up whether the government is going to reform as a result of compulsion or as a result of conviction. And if we felt, many of us felt, that if it is going to be one of compulsion, I think we stop at a particular process. We are not going to go forward. I'm glad that Dr. Rangarajan, who was the main player in the whole thing, makes one pithy statement again, that this reform process was not as a result of compulsion, but as a result of conviction. He quotes also his dialogue with Dr. Manmohan Singh, his Prime Minister, and his meeting with the Prime Minister, which asserts that they were convinced of the move that has to be made, not because the IMF is dictating this term. I know that I happened to be in the North Block around that time when the Finance Minister made his speech. Mr. Chidambaram was the first to shoot off. I remember that communication on the international trade, liberalization, came overnight. I think in the afternoon he gave the speech. Next morning it appeared in the press, the international trade liberalization. He could not have witnessed the amount of joy which created the so-called Reform Club. That I think at last things have started happening in the country. It was a very major reform. Next day there was a slight dampener when the industry ministry dismantled the permitted license Raj. Dampener was not so much in this, it did get dismantled. But they put a clause saying that you still need the approval, automatic approval. I could not figure out what is this automatic approval means, where does this terminology come? I think Mankat was the secretary at the time. I went and talked to Mankat. So if you seek approval, I can understand. What is this automatic approval? If the approval has to be automatic, why do you need anybody to seek approval? He could not answer. I don't know who coined that word. There was no Shashi Tharoor at the time to coin that word. And so they, somehow or other, we got off. But what followed was interesting. I had a meeting with Finance Minister. It was so accidental meeting. I was hovering around North Block waiting to meet the Finance Secretary. And then he happened to come into the room. He said, Vagul, why don't you come in? He was in a leisurely mode and he talked to me. Two things which told me at the time. He was supporting Dr. Rangarajan's statement that it is a result of conviction. He talked to me at length about his North-South Bank experience and also the South Korea and the Asian Tigers. I said, we can't be behind. We have to move forward. And I complimented him about the speech in the budget speech. He told me, Vagul, I have just 100 days to do what I want to do. Beyond 100 days, I will not be allowed to do what I want to do. And he then into the banking commission that was appointed. Narasimham was the chairman, and I happened to be a member of the commission. We were in a state of euphoria at that time, saying that at last we are making it up. Whatever was the laggard in the economy at the time, this is going to be the day that we are going to. And when I entered the discussions with the banking commission, the whole lot of hope. Of course, that I don't want to tell the story. And basically, you would find that Dr. 100 days are over by the time. And possibly the political events took over to Narasimham started playing a very defensive role, saying we cannot make a recommendation which is not going to be politically acceptable. So we cannot think in terms of privatization of banking, not privatization, handing it to the private parties, but a broader public participation with professional management is what we were aiming at. It's not going to work out. He coined an interesting phrase. I don't know whether it appears in Dr. Rangarajan's book. The government can retain the ownership, but should get into a self-denial of the ownership rights, saying we don't want to exercise our rights. And there was a bit of a dampener for us, saying what is this dilution coming to? But ultimately, I think two people submitted a minute of dissent. One I remember is Manish Rauf, another is an economist from Delhi. Both of them said that this won't work. And as it turned out, I think this was only written in the report. Nobody talked about it later, the government did not talk about it. Looking back, I find that I fully endorse Mr. Chidambaram's statement that reform was a major step forward in our economy. I think we moved forward. I think economy underwent a transformation, people's lives underwent a transformation, middle class became very happy, even though the poverty did not reduce to the extent that we figured. Certainly the economy turned and went over. But people like me, who were expecting much more from this reform process, we were not happy at all. I think I must honestly confess that we did not find one piece missing, that the state was not willing to give up its ownership of the enterprises, leave alone the banking system. The state-owned enterprises continue to remain so. And to me, it always looked that the reform process was left hanging in the air. And people talked about a second stage reform, third stage reform. None of these things came out. And I always had a feeling that I remember those days when we met in Delhi, I was part of the CII team which was meeting, and CII team also had a subgroup who were favoring the reform. There was a whole lot of people who did not favor the reform because they wanted protection under all circumstances. We were not in favor of that. And that time, I recall mentioning that somewhere we missed the way, we missed the turn. It's a fork in the road. We were going straight in the reform process at a particular speed. Suddenly, I don't know what happened. We missed a fork. We went in a different direction. As a result of which, some of the major events that took place subsequent to the whole process can be attributed to that. You know, at that time we used to say that we thought that we were behind China in 10 years' time, 1991 reform process. It's a matter of time before we catch up with China. Of course, we were under no illusions, namely that as a political democracy, we can do only this much. In a sense, we cannot hurt the people in the short term for achieving long-term gains. And politically, it is not acceptable. Even from our economic point of view, it's not acceptable. But given that, I thought maybe in 10 years' time we'll catch up with China, whether we overtake with China or not. But to me, it's always a sort of a mistake. I mean, it's something which bothers me, that we have not achieved the full potential. It is not only a question of poverty. That is, the inequality in the income is something which is daunting, in the sense of poverty is so striking. It is not that only, that even today, 30 years after the reform began in 1991, we are still struggling with the basics. We are not able to move forward. What is it that is holding us back? I really do not know. At one of the World Economic Forum meetings, I was sitting next to a Mexican delegate. I don't know whether he was a bureaucrat or he was a minister. I mean, I don't remember that even very clearly. But at that time, the Prime Minister Narasimha came and talked about the reform. That was the first hint we got that these things are not going as strongly as we wanted it. Now, I am not saying that we were the last word. We believed at that time reform was an answer to the whole thing. Mr. Narasimha started talking about gradualism in the reform. He talked about reform with a human face. That these things bothered us a lot, saying, does it mean that reform is slowing down, it's going to go to the Mexican delegate was sitting next to me, heard these phrases and turned to me. So, Agul, what your Prime Minister is saying, watch it. If you are on this side of the road and if you want to cross to the other side of the road and the traffic is very heavy, you wait for a small break and then dash across to the other side. If you want to cross the road gradually, then you have run the risk of being run over by the traffic. I don't know where we missed the turn here. The folks on the road, did we miss a fork at a particular point of time? We are still struggling. We nowhere near where China was. He talked about the Chinese level of poverty. It is not only Chinese level of poverty. At this age, at 86, I feel sorry that somewhere at some point of time we could have done more than what was necessary. What was done was something great, but we were capable of something greater. We were capable of something doing potential. Even 30 years later, I don't know whether we recognize it. So Dr. Rangarajan's book is a graphic book containing the facts as they are. And for any student of the history, when you look back on the 30 years, whether you want to see it as just a phase in our development, or is it 3 decades of lost opportunity, which you could have really done, is something which the future historians will debate on that. And this gives ample material which really gives any researcher an opportunity to look back the 3 decades. I know that people are talking in terms of 2030, 2040. And then forget about the past. I also believe in the dictum, I think it was Churchill who said that, if the present were to sit in judgment over the past, there will be no future. But present is not going to be sitting in the judgment, but the present is going to learn from the mistakes of the past. And I think the book gives ample data, ample information for you to where did we go wrong, where did we make a mistake, how can we rectify it. Today we are living in a different world. We are looking at future with optimism. However, I am not very much bothered about the growth. I am bothered about what our chief guest today is, that the poverty in the country. To deny the existence of the poverty, to deny the existence of misery across the country, is to deny the inevitable thing which we are watching. And it is that which should be the focus of attention, not so much whether it is a 1% growth or 8% growth. Where does it lead to? Ultimately, if it does not result in the erosion of the poverty level in the country, I think the development has no meaning at all. I fully endorse what our Honorable Chief Guest said, that we keep an eye on the poverty, and there the book gives ample material to look back on the past. So where did we go wrong? How can we move forward? I compliment Dr. Rangarajan for the wonderful book he has written. As an enormous contribution, it not only talks in terms of, I'm indebted to use the word, we all came from a humble beginning. When we were in the Laila College, a student, and he was also a student a year back, we know from what economic background we came. We came from a humble economic background. And he has traveled so far, he has climbed so many mountains, he has achieved pinnacles of various types. And that was possible in a country like this. It's a great contribution. It's a great commentary on the way in which our country has functioned. And all this has been documented in the form of not merely an autobiography. It is the economic history of the period, for 3 decades period. Economic history of the Reserve Bank of India. Economic history of the planning process. All these things are rich, providing rich data to the future historians. Thank you once again for your wonderful.
Thank you very much, sir. I now take the opportunity to introduce our next guest, next speaker, Dr. D. Subbarao. However, we will hear a video recorded message sent by him. Dr. D. Subbarao has served as the 22nd Governor of Reserve Bank of India from September 2008 under the then Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. He has also been the Joint Secretary of Department of Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Finance in Government of India and Secretary to the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. I would request Mr. Bishwajit to play the message.
I'm delighted, honored and proud to be part of this book release event. Forks in the Road is a very appropriate title for Dr. Rangarajan's book. Forks in the road is a metaphor we use for those moments in our lives, our personal lives, our professional lives, when we have to make important choices. Choices that have significant implications for the future. Choices that are often irreversible. What separates a leader from foot soldiers is the ability of the leader to make those choices with courage, confidence, and conviction. Dr. Rangarajan is a true leader, an intellectual leader who made those choices which had a profound impact on India's economic trajectory. You have to read the book, Forks in the Road, to get a full flavor of the forks that he confronted, the forks that he chose, the implications of those choices that he made, and the way it has changed economic history. Dr. Rangarajan started his career as a teacher. He left teaching to join public service. But the teacher in him has never left him. Generations of students, many of them achievers in their own right, admire him as a teacher. Some, like Dr. Y.V. Reddy, the former governor of the Reserve Bank of India, admire him, acknowledge him as a teacher. But of course, there are many, many others who think of him as a teacher in the Ekalavya sense, that they learned from him, although he's never taught them directly. When it comes to teacher-student relationship, I should say I've been very privileged, unfortunate, because I've been a very special student of Dr. Rangarajan. When Dr. Rangarajan was chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, I was secretary to the council for 3 years, 2005 to 2007, when we worked very closely together. And I learned a lot from him on a host of economic issues which actually defied solution, but it was Dr. Rangarajan's intelligence, competence, track record that found solutions. I know for a fact that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and Finance Minister Chidambaram relied on his advice, sought his advice, were confident about accepting his advice and implemented his advice. When I speak about Dr. Rangarajan, I'm very fond of telling this story. When I was working with him, one Sunday evening, I was walking in Lodi Garden when I ran into Mr. S.R. Shankaran. Mr. S.R. Shankaran was a retired IAS officer. Unfortunately, he's no more. He's about 15 years senior to me in the AP cadre of the IAS. When he was visiting Delhi, I ran into him in the Lodi Garden. He and Dr. Rangarajan went to college together in Madras University, so they go back many years. So Mr. Shankaran asked me, Subbarao, are you still working with Rangarajan? I said, yes, sir. So what do you work on? I said, sir, we're working on EXIM scripts, poverty ratio, PPP in infrastructure, a number of other issues. He smiled at me and said, you know, back in Hyderabad, some MA students come to revise their syllabus with me. I help them study. And before they go for their exams, I give them one advice. I tell them, if you know the answer to a question, write it. But if you are in doubt, preface your answer by saying, as the Rangarajan committee said in its report. Because you'll probably be right, because there's probably a Rangarajan committee on virtually every economic topic. But even if there isn't, even in the unlikely event that there wasn't, no examiner in the country has the guts to question that. So that's how impactful Dr. Rangarajan's career has been. Dr. Rangarajan left his imprimatur on many, many dimensions of economic policy. I just want to mention three. The first is his impact on external sector liberalization. It's in fact difficult to talk about the 1991 reforms without acknowledging Dr. Rangarajan's role in it. We know that the Blitzkrieg reforms of 1991 meant a decisive break with the past, when the economy was set off in an entirely new direction. Those reforms were implemented under Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, Finance Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, and Mr. Chidambaram was Commerce Minister at that time. There were a number of bureaucrats in Delhi at that time, very competent, very intelligent, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Amarnath Varma, Dr. Y.V. Reddy, N.K. Singh, Rakesh Mohan, Shankaracharya, who all supported the political executive in the implementation of the reforms. But from the Reserve Bank side, there was only one person, Dr. Rangarajan, and a great institution behind him. We know that the 1991 reforms were kick-started with the devaluation of the rupee. That has a code name, hop, skip and jump, and it was carried out with military precision. I will not even attempt to recount that. You have to actually read about it to get the full flavor of the drama of that devaluation. You have to read the book Forks in the Road. But we know that the Blitzkrieg reforms of 1991 that started off with the devaluation of the rupee continued on a long journey. That journey was charted by Dr. Rangarajan, who headed the Balance of Payments Committee report. It was because of that report, it's because of the roadmap laid down by that report that we took very momentous decisions in the external sector management. We went from a controlled exchange rate to a dual exchange rate and eventually to a unified single market determined exchange rate. The rupee became convertible on current account, and we had a roadmap for convertibility on capital account on which we are traversing even today. We went from the infamous FARA to the more reformist FAMA. We liberalized our FDI and FII regimes. All this because of the roadmap that was laid down by Dr. Rangarajan in the Balance of Payments Committee report. That was his enormous contribution to the external sector. When I was governor, RBI, in 2013, we had the taper tantrums when the rupee crashed by about 20% in 4 months. It was a moment of deep stress. It was a very difficult time. But I can say this, that the stress would have been much deeper. The times would have been much more difficult, but for the resilience our external sector had because of all the reforms that were implemented under Dr. Rangarajan's guidance. The second dimension of economic policy where Dr. Rangarajan left an imprimatur is, of course, monetary policy, establishing the credibility, the independence of the central bank. Today we talk about the independence of the central bank, but Dr. Rangarajan was ahead of all of us. He was talking about it when none of us realized the importance of the independence of the central bank. The evolution of monetary policy in India owes to the Sukumai Chakravarti report of the 1980s. Professor Chakravarti actually acknowledges very explicitly the enormous intellectual contribution made by Dr. Rangarajan to shaping that report. Dr. Rangarajan took that forward. His Kutti Memorial Lecture in 1993 is a landmark lecture that laid the intellectual foundations for the independence of the central bank. And when he became governor himself, in 1997, he brought to a conclusion, brought to an end the ad hoc practice, the egregious practice of ad hoc treasury bills, which freed monetary policy from fiscal dominance, gave independence to the central bank, and actually laid the foundation for the evolution of money markets in India. And the fruits of those reforms we're enjoying today. The third segment, third dimension, where Dr. Rangarajan left an imprimatur, is fiscal policy. Today, all of us talk about fiscal responsibility. Of course, fiscal responsibility is very important, but we talk about it, we understand it, because Dr. Rangarajan has been evangelizing about it. He did that as governor of the Reserve Bank of India. He did that as chairman of the Finance Commission. He did that as chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. He's doing that today as a freelance thinker and writer. If in monetary policy, Dr. Rangarajan is a Friedman follower, in fiscal policy, he's a very measured Keynesian. I remember 15 years ago, Dr. Rangarajan and I wrote a paper titled The Importance of Being Earnest About Fiscal Responsibility. The importance of being earnest about fiscal responsibility. In the last 15 years, I've had occasion to revise that article at least twice and republish it. But the fundamental ideas Dr. Rangarajan enunciated in that paper remain the same. That's the reason that paper remains fresh. That's the reason I've been able to republish it twice in the last 15 years, because of the fundamental principles he enunciated in the very first paper. Some of you might recall that 3 years ago, in the thick of the pandemic, there was a debate in the country about whether the Reserve Bank should directly monetize the deficit of the government, directly print money and give it to the government. And there was a lot of people who expressed concern about that, how they said how that will actually give a very wrong signal to every market participant, all the financial markets, every potential investor, actually do more harm than good. The reason for that heightened sensibility is in fact the evangelizing Dr. Rangarajan has done over the last 25 years on the importance of fiscal responsibility. So those are the three areas: external sector liberalization, monetary policy, in particular independence of the central bank, and fiscal policy, in particular the importance of fiscal responsibility. Those are three areas where Dr. Rangarajan has left an enormous influence. But those are just three areas. You have to in fact read this book, Forks in the Road, to grasp the enormous contribution of Dr. Rangarajan to India's economic management. So let me conclude now by again coming back to Forks in the Road. I'm sure all of you heard of this book, Alice in Wonderland. Many of you might have read it as well. When Alice was wandering in the Wonderland, she comes to a fork. She doesn't know which fork to take. So she sees a Cheshire cat on the tree and asks the cat, which fork should I take? The cat says, that depends on where you want to go. Dr. Rangarajan was one of those few people who knows where he had to go. He knew where the economy had to go. So in conclusion, I want to say that Dr. Rangarajan has made a tremendous contribution to India's economic management. He'll be remembered as someone who served the country with dignity and distinction. I wish the book all success.
We thank Dr. D. Subbarao for this message. Our next speaker is Ms. Usha Thorat. She has served as Deputy Governor of RBI from November 2005 to November 2010. Prior to this, she was the Executive Director of RBI as well. Thank you, ma'am.
Respected Dr. Rangarajan, Mr. Chidambaram, Mr. Vagul, Dr. Subbarao, ladies and gentlemen. It's both an honor and a privilege for me to have been invited to speak here among such distinguished persons at this event to mark the release of Dr. Rangarajan's latest book, The Forks in the Road. I assume the fork in the road because got it a bit wrong. I thought it was a fork in the road. And now when I think about it, of course, there have been many forks, but I think the fork refers to his move from academia to public policy in 1982. That was a move that had enormous implications for his subsequent professional life and enabled him to contribute to the economy in a truly a path-breaking manner. For me personally, I and my batchmates of 1972 are very happy he came to RBI, as we would have never seen the positions we got later on in our career but for him. The rule in the RBI till then, until he changed it in 1984, was that for any vacancy, you called double the number of candidates strictly as per seniority. And the queue above our batch was a really long one. He changed that ratio to 3:1, and that made all the difference. He does not talk about the HR initiatives in his book, but this was a reform in Reserve Bank that was equally path-breaking. So if I'm here in this position to share this platform, it's entirely that fork in the road that has brought me here. I'm also in the unique position, along with very few others, and perhaps only Mr. Chidambaram, who worked very closely with Dr. Rangarajan from 1992 to 1997. I was Joint Chief Officer and later Chief Officer in the Department of External Investments and Operations that was responsible for managing the exchange rate and the foreign exchange reserves when the events he describes in chapter 7 of the book took place. Certain days are vivid in my memory. For example, the first day of the unified exchange rate system in March 1993, when for the first time in history, RBI did not announce a buying rate and a selling rate for the rupee against the dollar or any other foreign currency in the morning. Dr. Rangarajan, along with the Deputy Governor, Mr. Janaki Raman, and the Chief of the DEIO, were with us in the dealing room at 9 a.m. With bated breath, we waited to see when and which bank would give the first quote, and whether any bank would quote at all. Governor Rangarajan was quite confident that the market would settle just or below the market rate under the dual exchange rate policy, which operated from February 1992 till then. 5 minutes passed, no quote. Finally, a foreign bank quoted with a rupee-1 spread between the buying rate and the selling rate, and then other banks slowly followed. The spread started narrowing and settled more or less at the level that Dr. Rangarajan had predicted. We all breathed a huge sigh of relief. It had been an anxious moment, and as he describes in his book, the shift to market-determined exchange rate was nothing short of a silent revolution. Another date that stands out in my memory was from August to October 1995, when the rupee breached the famous 31.37 level that had prevailed for so long. This happened as globally the US dollar started strengthening against the Deutschmark and the yen. The market assumed that RBI would defend that 31.37 level within a range of 2.25% above and below that rate. And when Dr. Rangarajan permitted that level to be breached, all hell broke loose. For the first time, we understood what it was to intervene in the foreign exchange market on the sell side. We had been buying dollars till then. If we hit the banks, it would have to be at their buying rates, and this could make them game us. It was a battle of wits. Ultimately, intervention, monetary policy measures, and other measures described in the book had to be used. For the first time, Reserve Bank of India actively intervened in the forward markets and managed the forward premia as also the liquidity. His calming presence on the 18th floor gave us a lot of confidence, although the times were very stressful. To add to the stress, there's been newspaper headings each day which only made markets worse, which made matters worse. Open mouth operations, or OMO, was another tool to be used, and we quickly learned how to talk to the media and to the market participants. I also remember clearly Dr. Rangarajan's last day in the Reserve Bank in November 1997. Was it 21st November? When the rupee came under fresh attack in the wake of the Asian crisis and political developments. The maximum amount of intervention was in that month. It was a memorable last day. He was addressing all the senior officers on the 15th floor as we were selling more and more dollars, and the market was lapping it up, all the dollars we were selling, as if there was no tomorrow. Finally, at around 3 a.m., he told us to stop selling the dollars as there was political news that the government may fall. When Governor Jalan took over, the market opened with a gap of nearly a rupee. I admire his courage and nerve to have gone through that uncharted territory, convinced about the theory, but practicing its efficacy for the first time with consequences for his entire economy. When I read that book, Folks in the Road, I was transported to those days in Reserve Bank as I realized that the wisdom that pours out from the book had been absorbed by me and my colleagues in a way that it had become a part of us. The essence of the dilemma and the trade-offs for a liberalizing economy, having a high inflationary difference with the rest of the world, in managing the exchange rate and monetary policy while moving towards a current and greater capital account openness, were dinned into us in a real-life classroom as one faced volatile capital flows and volatility in exchange rates. He taught us the real meaning of central bank autonomy, the relationship between the fiscal and monetary policy, the importance of looking at interest rates and liquidity, money supply, and real exchange rates while implementing policy. He will make you understand all this too when you read the book, Folks in the Road, written in his uniquely professorial style with utter clarity. I think there can be no better book to understand the theory and practice of central banking. The book has not been diluted by anecdotes which some people feel could have been included considering the exciting uncharted period we were going through. But he explains his intention for writing the book to explain the underlying rationale of the policies. And that, I think, objective he has achieved in full measure. Dr. Rangarajan has contributed in so many areas of the RBI's working that it is difficult to do justice to all in just one book. Nevertheless, I would like to mention a few measures he took which were significant in their contribution to the economy and to RBI. Dr. Subbarao has already spoken about the three most important ones, but I want to mention certain other very important measures not mentioned in his book. In the area of rural credit, he has talked about the self-help groups and the encouragement given to them through the bank SAG linkage program. What was very revolutionary was his bold decision in 1994 to allow banks to open a savings bank account in the name of the self-help group with signatory powers for the two group leaders. Opening a bank account for an informal entity, an SHG, unthinkable, unheard of. This single measure paved the way for the largest financial inclusion program in the world. Another very interesting story, which I would have liked him to include in the book, maybe in the second edition, is how he prevented the Reserve Bank's balance sheet from going into the red. A very important scheme to mobilize foreign exchange reserves was the foreign currency non-resident deposit scheme. It was a foreign currency deposit scheme for non-resident Indians. This had to be phased out, and because this scheme the exchange risk was borne by the Reserve Bank of India. It was gradually phased out by another scheme where the exchange risk was borne by the banks themselves, because by then the markets had developed. But at the time of finalization of the balance sheet of the Reserve Bank in 1994, the outstanding dollar balances under the scheme for which Reserve Bank had taken on the liability for the exchange risk was $10 billion. The average rate at which RBI had committed to the banks to sell back the dollars to them was 18 rupees, and the market rate was 31 rupees. So for every dollar, the loss that RBI would have to incur was 13 rupees, which meant about 1,300 crores. RBI's reserves were inadequate to meet this. Of course, this was on the basis of accrual accounting. And so that, if we had absorbed this, the RBI's balance sheet would have been in the red. Dr. Rangarajan got the two Janakis to work on it. Deputy Governor Janaki Raman and Secretary Janaki Katpalia. The solution found was ingenious. Government of India, whose accounting was on a cash basis, would take over the foreign exchange, non-resident exchange risk liability, and Reserve Bank would transfer additional profits to the Government of India to the same extent each year as and when the deposits matured. Thus, the balance sheet of the Reserve Bank was saved. No wonder Dr. Tarapur, himself a legendary person in the reform process and a huge pillar of strength for Dr. Rangarajan, called exchange guarantees a cardinal sin for a central bank. Another path-breaking measure, which I certainly think was path-breaking, was the liberalization of gold import into the country, without much drama, mind you. Although for India at that time, it was unimaginable. The errors and omissions figure in the balance of payment was always very large. And at that time, and usually it represented the illegal import of gold into India. So around $4 billion, I remember, was the estimate at that time. Critics said if gold import was liberalized, the country's foreign exchange reserves would vanish. Dr. Reddy had done considerable research, and Dr. Rangarajan was convinced that if such imports were allowed through authorized banks, gold imports could be liberalized. He convinced the finance minister, yes, indeed, it was Mr. Chidambaram, and in July 1997, RBI authorized commercial banks to import gold for sale to jewelers and exporters. As Dr. Reddy said in his speech on gold policy in 2002, the liberalized gold policy brought to the official sector what was originally in the unofficial sector. Without doubt, it eliminated illegal transactions and profiteers out of such transactions with attendant socio-economic impact of large scale and high market value involving cross-border operations. At the level of managing the external sector and forex markets, the elimination of large unofficial market and forex improved the policy effectiveness. I remember literally overnight the gold price in Dubai and in Bombay were more or less equalized, and the premium in the Hawala market disappeared. I would also like to share the personal qualities of Dr. Rangarajan, who has always been so humble and affectionate. In his palatial house in Mumbai, the official governor's residence, there was a kitchen made on the first floor so that his wife could prepare the food that he liked. She was his equal as an intellectual, with her deep knowledge of iconography and study of temples. My husband and I remember her visit to Kolhapur, where she stumped the poor pujari in one of the temples by pointing out to the image of a person who built the temple in a corner in one of the shikaras. Dr. Rangarajan's childlike innocence and humility are very striking, and one is amazed to see how very updated he is with whatever is happening in the economy, and manages to write his column regularly, bringing in something fresh and thoughtful each time. Folks in the Road is a must read for every student and teacher of economics, like everybody has said. But I think for practitioners in banking, in central banks, and for those who truly enjoy reading economic history. I wish Dr. Rangarajan good health, and may he continue to teach us always the true guru that he is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I now invite our beloved chairman, Dr. C. Rangarajan, to deliver his views about the book. He himself has said, and I quote, "Many people ask me, did you enjoy being the governor of RBI? My answer is, I am enjoying in retrospect." We are looking forward to hear from the author himself.
Mr. Chidambaram, Mr. Vagul, Ms. Usha Thoret, and friends. Let me at the outset Thank you all for your gracious presence this evening. It reflects the affection in which you hold me. As I have said in the book, I did not think of writing the book for a long time. I have also said this is a book which must have been written many years ago. I'm extremely thankful to Chidambaram for the kind words he had said about me. I must admit, I'm truly overwhelmed. We have worked together, not only worked together in normal times, but worked together in the most difficult times. In fact, when Vagul also pointed out about the interaction between the different segments of the government, what was really important during that crisis years was the fact that there was mutual understanding and close interaction among the various segments of the government. Talking of Reserve Bank and the government at that time. We not only did the governor and the finance minister talk to each other, also at the various levels also there was close interaction. In fact, Chidambaram mentioned about many areas in which how the RBI and the government collaborated. I will come back to one or two of them a little later. I must also thank Vagul for recalling our association over the last 7 decades. I think this is almost a lifetime. And it so happened that Vagul was not exactly my student, even though I was a lecturer at that time, because he didn't take that particular option that I was teaching at that time. But from that time onwards, we have exchanged views, we have met often. But the occasion on which we really came close together was after the submission of the Chakravarti Committee report. We felt the need to look at not only the monetary system at one level, but also look at the money market system in the country so that the transmission mechanism of monetary policy works efficiently. That was when I requested the Reserve Bank to appoint a committee under the chairmanship of Vagul to make recommendations. On the basis of those recommendations, we created new instruments and even new institutions. For example, the certificates of deposit and many similar instruments were the consequence of that. The establishment of the Discount and Finance House of India, of which I was the first chairman, was also set up in order to improve the functioning of the money market system. Subbarao mentioned many things, and he worked with me closely in the Economic Advisory Council. I did not know him earlier. I chose him from a list of people that was given to us. And naturally, he played an important role in the Economic Advisory Council. And I must thank him for the very nice things he has said about what I had done in the Reserve Bank. I think many people do not know, almost the first article on the impact of fiscal deficit on the economy and the sustainability of the fiscal deficit was written by me in somewhere about 86 or 1986 or 87. That in fact precedes the Buter and Patel article, which is very often quoted in many international journals as the first article on the subject. But anyway, I think there is what you call a tangency point between monetary policy and fiscal policy. And the tangency point is the extent of borrowing. Otherwise, actually, the two can function independently. But ultimately, the fiscal authority not only wants to raise X amount of resources through borrowing, but also wants the rate of interest to be lower. Now, in fact, it is a complete contradiction in terms. I want to borrow more and more at lower interest rate. I think this is against all principles of demand and supply. But you can't put any rationality on a desire. So I think that's what happened. But then, as I was saying, that this is one, when actually the borrowing goes beyond a level which can be absorbed, so to say, by the market, then you lean on the central bank of the country in one way or the other, whether directly or indirectly. And that is how the principle of what they call fiscal dominance comes into play. The Chakravarti Committee, about which the reference was also made, underlined the main point that in the final analysis, unless there is an agreement between the monetary authority and the central the government, it will not be possible to resolve. I think both of them come to some understanding that beyond this particular level, reserve money will not be created. So, Usha Thorat has also been very generous about me. In fact, only as she was speaking, I remembered some of the incidents that happened because the movement to a market-determined exchange rate system was not that easy. Many people told me, and even the governor of Maharashtra at that point mentioned to me that the value of the rupee at that point in time said will go to 40 rupees to your dollar. And we played the game. If they were going to play a game, we were willing to play a game. And finally it settled down at a very reasonable level. In fact, as I described in the report, the fork there was, we were the dual exchange rate system with 40% official rate and 60% market rate. Where do we go from here? Should we go to 80-20 or some such 75-25, or really go to 100-0? And it is being discussed, And there are other complications in this because there was a certain amount of credit in rupee terms, which in relation to the Russian trade, and how to handle that became an issue immediately after that. So in the finance ministry itself, there were differences of opinion. Finally, the finance minister and I met and took the decision to go to the market determined, fully market determined exchange rate system. The fear was what could happen to the value of the rupee. And many people told us at that time that many people have moved into dollar and they are going to make a killing by coming back into the rupees once the value of the rupee falls very steeply. And that did not happen. The rupee stabilized at a reasonable level. And it is true that I did get threatening calls at that time, that you have killed us, then we will kill you. And there was a call saying that there will be an explosion in the Reserve Bank. And the police advised me to vacate my office and move somewhere else. But that turned out to be completely bogus, and we moved on. But I say this only to indicate how some decisions can become very, very difficult. Sometimes your rationality alone is not enough. With rationality, some courage is also required. In fact, that is true of the reforms completely. I mean, many people keep asking the question, how is it you all took the decision in 1991 to move in this direction? Many of the participants or many of the people involved in this were themselves grand supporters of the earlier strategies. So how did you move? I can only say that it is the severity of the crisis which really compelled us to move. In fact, I write in that in one of the chapters, devaluation of the rupee was by itself not a great decision. We have taken such decisions even earlier. So I write in the book, that decision was bold. But the bolder decision was to follow up the devaluation with a liberalization of the external sector, of which Chidambaram was the leader at that time. Therefore, that is more important. Previously, whenever we had a balance of payments difficulty, the way to solve the problem was tighten further, put more import controls and so on. But for the first time in 1991, we said we will devalue the rupee and we will liberalize the foreign trade, and we will move away from the import substitution policy and embrace the global trade as part of ours. So this is really a big change that happened at that particular time. When you look back, I see there are important decisions that were taken. One was, people have talked about it, is moving away from the automatic monetization of the fiscal deficit. That has been talked about, and I will not go into it. I mean, I think that's a very important decision, and I have to thank both Manmohan Singh and Chidambaram for the considerable cooperation they gave to implement that decision. It was done in two phases. First of all, the old system of issue of Adai treasury bills itself was modified first. Then in 1997, finally, when Chidambaram was the finance minister, the decision was taken to move away completely and substituted by Ways and Means Advance. Therefore, that is the first step towards the autonomy of the central bank. I do think that H.V.R. Iyengar, when he was governor, also raised the issue. But at that time, T.T. Krishnamachari was the finance minister. And there are many things about T.T. Krishnamachari that I don't like, but this is also one among them, where he simply did not allow H.V.R. Iyengar to go beyond a point. I said, I have noted what your concern, and it will be taken care of. I think that's not the way things will happen always. But anyway, that is there. But the other important thing in monetary policy was the deregulation of the interest rate system. The administrative structure rate of interest had to go. Now, but when the administrative structure rate of interest has to go, that means the government is affected, because the government has to go to the market and raise the resources at the rate which is acceptable to the market. Obviously, government being the riskless borrower, the rate of interest on government bonds will be lower. But that's a reflection of the fact that you are lending it to somebody who cannot default. Therefore, that is acceptable. But it has to be related to what the market demands. That had two consequences. One is that it really began to bite the government when the borrowing went beyond a limit. And the second and important thing is open market operations, which is considered to be one of the important instruments of credit control, became possible in India. Until that particular point, open market operations was completely ruled out, because the rate of interest offered on the paper was not market determined. So it gave to the central bank, if the first act of moving away from ad hoc treasury bills gave autonomy to the Reserve Bank, it is the deregulation of the interest rate structure gave an additional instrument of credit control as far as the central bank is concerned. And in the field of exchange rate management, I think we certainly believe that what happened during that particular period is of great importance. And when I say it is a silent revolution, I think it was really a revolution. It was, and many people did not think of it. I mean, in fact, in our original plan of reforms, it was not well specified. But then we very quickly went, because if you look at it, it is really in the period of 91 to 97 where most of the reforms really were pushed into this system. So the total gamut of measures taken and the speed with which we were able to introduce were all so effective and helped to promote the movement of the system in the right direction. Our rate of growth picked up even in that period, but there is but as it gathered speed subsequently, it is in the second phase of the UPA government or the Congress government that you saw the full benefits of the reforms when the growth rate went up to a high level. In fact, between 2005-6 and 2007-8, the average rate of growth of the Indian economy was in excess of 9%. I mean, I think this has not been seen in the Indian economy at all. And it showed what the potential rate of growth of the economy is. That is, India has the potential to grow at 9% if we have the right configuration of policies. Anyway, I think I don't want to take much of your time. I do not know how to describe my book. To call it a memoir is not absolutely correct. Memoir is always personal. Memoir always talks about what ye did, what one did, and link all the actions to the person. I have not done that. I mean, I think I have narrated the events with which I was associated, the events which I initiated, but it is more about the events rather than myself. I mean, I think this is, I have tried to avoid it. I do talk in one chapter, but the personalities with whom I interacted, even that in a very limited fashion. For the readers of the book, I would only suggest it has 3 parts. Part 1 talks of the 1980s, the crisis years. Part 2 talks of the reforms in some detail. Part 3 talks about many things that I did after being governor of the Reserve Bank and being a member of the parliament or the governor of a state and so on. Part 1 and part 3 are easy to read. I'm afraid that part 2 is somewhat difficult. And therefore, if you are not so well familiar with economics and finance discussions, you just browse through it. Some research students, some teachers of economics may find it all right to read through the chapters, because there was a conflict in my mind all the time as to whether I do talk about all of these things, and as you find that even after talking about all of these things, I found out something missing, which Usha pointed out. Actually, I should have written about gold policy. I think gold policy was a very, very important decision that we took. And in fact, that also fundamentally altered the nature of the foreign exchange market. That was very important. I mean, I think I remember noting it down, but failed to talk about it. If there is a second edition, I will certainly incorporate that. But the other things are anecdotal. I am not indulged in very much. I mean, there are a few anecdotes here and there which are mentioned, but that there is an American style of writing in which, as if that it's all in conversational style, as if it happened and somebody was recording everything. I decided not to follow that route. Let me finally say that forks in the road was a suggestion which came from my son-in-law, and I put that title. There was some discussion about whether the word forks in the road is correct or not. The phrase is only fork in the road. So I told them that no, I'm not talking about fork in the road in the sense whether I left academia and coming to the Reserve Bank. That was not the fork that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fork that you meet all along the line. I mean, it's not And that's the quote from Robert Frost. So the second line, two roads diverge in the yellow wood. And sorry, I cannot travel on both. So that is the crux of all decision making. At every point you have to say whether you want to go in one direction or another direction. Then Penguin also told me that yes, the phrase is fork in the road, but whether forks in the road is appropriate, may be appropriate, but whether it is correct or not, we don't know. Then finally we checked everything and then found out there are 5 books written so far with the same title, Forks in the Road. So anyway, I think that's it. I mean, I think if you're wrong, then 5 others are wrong too. So anyway, this is a book which took a little longer to write. It is essentially because that after having been the governor of the Reserve Bank, I moved on from one thing to another thing and just kept postponing writing. And finally, after 2014, I thought that I should write it. Then came COVID-19, and that interrupted something. But I could recall most of the events, but not all of them. I think perhaps if I had written it in 1998 or 1999, maybe some more incidents would have been reported. But anyway, I must thank you once again for for your presence this evening. I must also thank the Penguin for publishing the book. Manish Kumar of Penguin and Agarwal of Penguin have been very helpful. Manish Kumar has been the editor of the book, and we have been in continuous correspondence for a time. Once again, thank you for coming, and thank you for your presence.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I would like to request Dr. Shanmugam, our director, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Respected Dr. C. Rangarajan, the former Chairman of Economic Advisory Council to Prime Minister of India, former Governor of Reserve Bank of India and Chairman of Madras School of Economics, respected Sri P. Chidambaram, Honorable former Finance Minister, Government of India and Member of Parliament, respected Sri N. Vagul, former Chairman of ICICI Bank Limited and former Chairman of IFMR, respected Ms. Usha Throt, former Deputy Governor of Reserve Bank of India, distinguished invitees, Dr. Rangarajan's family members and Dr. Chellaya's family members, faculty, students of MSc and other academic institution and media representatives. It is a great privilege for me to be here to propose a vote of thanks on this special occasion. Indeed, it is a great day for all of us as part of this wonderful event with the great dignitaries on the dais. On behalf of MSc and on my own behalf, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to our esteemed guest Sri P. Chidambaram, Honorable former Finance Minister, for releasing the book, The Forks in the Road, My Days at RBI and Beyond, authored by Dr. C. Rangarajan. Sir, I am also very grateful to you for your excellent remarks on the book and also on our Chairman, Dr. C. Rangarajan. I wish to express my sincere gratitude to our Chairman, Dr. C. Rangarajan, for authoring this excellent book, which is a great inspiring book for economists and policymakers, recording in golden letters his path-breaking policy and reform decisions when he was in RBI and in various committees and commissions, and also in the Economic Advisory Council to Prime Minister of India during the period 1982 to 2014, and also recording the transition of Indian economy that recorded the potential growth of about 9% during that period. Our honorable former finance minister said that he listened to him when he was the finance minister. So this means that the entire country listened and benefited from his policy ideas. The whole country is proud of you, sir. I am grateful to Sri N. Vahul, Dr. Subba Rao, Ms. Usha Throd for their wonderful speech highlighting the important milestones explained in the book and also their interaction with Dr. C. Rangarajan. I also thank Mr. Manish Gupta of Penguin Random House for sending his introduction. I thank the family members of Dr. Rangarajan's and then Dr. Chellaya's family members. Finally, I thank all others who participate and grace this special occasion and make this event a great success. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. With this, we come to the end of this wonderful event. We mark the end of the event with our national anthem. So please rise for the anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल वंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण